Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Urban Ag Hour podcast. My name is Tiffany Drake, and I am a program coordinator with the Center for Urban Smart Agriculture. Today, I'm here with Art Leeds, who is the owner and operator of Rocking L3 Ranch. He predominantly grows pumpkins and raises sheep, and today he's going to tell us all about his operation. How are you doing this morning?
Good. Glad to be here.
Good. Okay, well, to start off, why don't you tell us about your farm and the history of kind of how you got to where you are today?
Yes. Yeah. So I consider myself a first, fifth generation farmer because my family's been farming and ranching in Verde Valley in northern Arizona since about 1884, and but I didn't inherit or take over a working farm or ranch operation. I since kind of restarted on my own and have been building it from scratch since then. My great grandparents started farming and ranching in Verde Valley, and they also had a place south of Mormon Lake where they would raise hay and vegetables and that kind of thing. And then in 1915, my grandfather came to Anderson Mesa area, which is east of Flagstaff, and so he and his family began ranching there. And when he and my grandmother met and married, they continued ranching east of Flagstaff. And that's basically all we did, and that's where kind of I grew up. And they so that went on until the late 1990s, and the ranch isn't there as it was at that point. But then in the mid 2000s, then I kind of went back to wanting to restore that heritage and keep that going. So I kind of restarted growing and raising livestock and everything else. And so then around 2017 is when I really began to start making it turn into a business. And I still do it. It's still kind of I can't do it full time. I spend a lot of time doing it, but I've been trying to build it up to the point where it can, run on its own.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at today. At that point, trying to scale up, a little bit more, and keep it going as much as I can. Keep that heritage alive.
When your ancestors were raising livestock, were they also doing sheep as well, or were they doing other livestock?
So it was primarily cattle, but they did raise sheep in the very early days. So like in the mid 1900s, when my grandfather got here, I know that they were running a lot of sheep, and there was a lot of sheep in this area. As I understand, the lamb, the meat and wool prices kind of dove out, and it kind of reduced the demand for the lamb and other factors, and so the sheep went away, and most of it turned into cattle ranching. And that's what my grandfather, he just, from nothing built up and would buy pieces of land when he could, and eventually and he built it back to an all cattle ranch.
Okay.
So when I grew up, we never had any sheep. Sheep were basically foreign to me. We only had cattle, and we had full herds, and they were very gentle and raised east of Flagstaff, which isn't like the most lush environment for grasses and things like that, but they thrive based on his and my grandma's management practices and stuff over the years. So when I decided to, I always wanted to raise livestock, and I always wanted to be a rancher. And, I love that lifestyle, but, given the amount of acreage available, it's too difficult to try to run cattle. And so that's where I found the avenue to grow sheep, because they can subsist on, much less resources than cattle can.
Yeah, so you just kind of adapted to figure out. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, well, how about you tell me about your system here that you have at the farm and how it's been scaling.
Okay, yeah. So I was always taught like kind of the old school ways of growing, and another grandfather had, kind of taught me a lot about growing when I was younger, and was to, in those days there wasn't the pesticides and herbicides and things weren't as prevalent. They were starting to come on, but I learned how to try to grow the stuff without using external inputs. Basically try to use mechanical measures or just ingenuity to try to address certain problems. So it was important to me to grow it naturally, sustainably, and regenerative. So I'm not worried about organic, because I think that's not as important as it being grown naturally, where isn't using pesticides or herbicides. I don't spray anything, and making it sustainable, where I don't put so much time and money into one particular thing that it's not viable. So I'm trying to find that balance of growing in that manner, and that's where I've found with the sheep being able to use the well composted manure that I get from them, and then the wool pellets that I'm creating from their wool for fertilizer. I'm able to reduce the external inputs and kind of create. So, and in some respects, it may be more expensive to do it that way, but the end product is much better, and then it's just a much better quality product, and I feel much better about the way that it was grown, and I can take it to the market and say that this has been grown responsibly, and without any of the pesticides or anything like that. The other thing is the regenerative part is important, because the soil health, and that's what I learned from my grandparents early on, is you have to take care of the soil and the water, because if you don't, it's not going to be there for you, the livestock, wildlife, or anything. And the byproduct you get of taking care of it is a growing environment that thrives. And so that's why that part has been important, and that's why I've been focusing on that, especially like with the composted manure, because the soil I'm growing on here it's not the best for growing. They grew beans out here, in the early days. They dry farmed them, but when it comes to growing a lot of things, there's not a lot of organic matter, just like the rest of Arizona. So I've been able to use the compost and these growing methods to improve the soil. And now when I open these up to plant, you can dig down and there's just tons and tons of earthworms, everywhere. And the soil's not concrete like what it had been.
Awesome. You mentioned the can you kind of go into how you heard about the wool pellets and kind of how you decided that you were going to implement on your farm?
Yes. So I've always tried to use wool because I have such an abundance of it from my sheep, because the type of sheep I grow, the wool is not marketable as wool. It's generally was used for rugs and things like out on the Navajo Nation. So it's not good for fine textiles like that you would wear. So there hasn't been a market, especially since COVID, for that wool. But it's such an amazing fiber that I would always try to use it. Like I would shred it and try to put it in as mulch, or integrate it with in the planting with the plants, and try to use it every way I could growing, because it holds water and it has so many characteristics that help. But it never really worked out that well, and I had heard a few years ago about wool pellets, and I thought, well, how am I going to make wool pellets? So then I really started looking at it 2 years ago, and I found that there was places that could shred and pelletize the wool for me. And so there was a business down in southern Arizona, and I took a whole bunch of bags of wool, and then it goes through 2 parts of the process. They shred it, and then once it's shredded, then they pelletize it. And at that point, it's 1-to-1, so it's 1 pound of wool pellets. There's no binder added; it's 100% natural. So there is any added chemicals, anything additional to the process. So it's a sustainable product, and that fact right there, that every year we have to shear, and we have nowhere to do it with that wool, so it almost becomes a waste. For a lot of people, it becomes a waste, and we're able to take that and convert it into a fertilizer. It makes it easier to apply into the growing, but it still has the quality of the wool, which it retains soil moisture, it provides aeration, it provides micronutrients, slow release of nitrogen, and it helps with soil compaction, and it's all natural, so you're not adding something that adds salts to your soil or degrade the soil, and still helps improve the soil. And the key to it was the shredded part of it. When they shred it, and pelletize it, once water hits it, then it starts to kind of expand back out. But it's a small enough fiber at that point that it can break down and become readily available to the plants. So that was kind of the key. The big turning point being a whole was the fact that those properties. And then it was really ideal for me in terms of fertilizer inputs, because now I'm using something that's growing and been raised on the same land that I'm growing and using pumpkin.
So when you are using these pellets for your fertilization, are you adding them in the soil when you're planting the seeds, or kind of when the plant might look like it needs a little bit more nutrients? Like, what's the process on you implementing those pellets into the soil?
So I add it before planting, when I open my furrows up, and I do minimal till. I'm not no till, but minimal till. So I use this old bottom plow that was my great grandparents, or great grandparents, I guess. And we open up a furrow, and then I add the composted sheep manure, and then I sprinkle in the wool pellets in that furrow. And once we have all that in there, then we roll the topsoil back over it. Then we plant into it, and then once the plants germinate, then I'll usually go back and top dress the individual plants, because the pellets are more expensive than traditional fertilizers, but you can localize them to the area that it really needs. But it overall benefits it.
Very fascinating stuff. It's something I've never really heard of. So very interesting to hear how you're implementing it and how you make it.
Right.
So I think it's very knowledgeable to know.
Yeah, and the other thing is to integrate it into potting soil. It's really good for potting soil because it helps even out watering, because the characteristics of wool, it absorbs water and it releases water. So when there's too much, it'll absorb it away, and when the soil gets dry, it'll release it back. So it kind of helps even the watering out. And I did notice once I started using it, I was able to water less and cool the pumpkins less, because of that characteristics. And the other thing is, I think it's good with starting seeds in, to mix in with it, because it's slow release nitrogen, so it doesn't burn the seedling.
Good. That's very good. What have been your biggest failures or surprises when it's come to your farming career?
That was funny, because I realized one of my biggest failures this morning when I walked out here, and I had this big, beautiful Y-star squash plant. It's like the patty pan style squash plant. This thing was the biggest one in the garden, and one I was using to send to the market, to the Flagstaff Mountain Town Market. And I came out here and it was all drooped because of the gophers. So one of my biggest failures has been my inability to manage the gopher problems that I continuously have. And so it's one of those things that kind of comes and goes. There's years where there's lots of them, years there's not so much. But overall, I've lost more in plants and even monetary value damage from gophers than probably anything else.
Yeah, gophers are a tricky one too. I know a lot of other stakeholders we have many troubles with gophers. So they're a tricky one to get rid of.
See, and I don't poison, because I don't want to ever expose the plants to poison, even though there's technically ways to do it. So I use traps. I also, with my sheep, so I rotate my sheep like into this growing area, before the season starts. So they're in here for a long time, and the commotion from the sheep seems to disperse the gophers out of this area, and so I keep them up to the point, and then I'll go ahead and move the sheep out, well before we plant, so that I'm well within like even the organic standards for manure and things like that, and that disturbance seems to repel the gophers away, and then usually I can get through most of the growing season. So I've already lost some pumpkin plants, but not at the rate like what I'm losing in the garden. I haven't ever had that. The activity in there to keep them kind of dispersed away. So
it's interesting how the sheep maybe they're scaring them away.
I think it's the constant hoof, and the movement and the motion and things like that. They just don't like it. So like even where I keep the sheep right now, which is where I'll grow next year, right now there's if there's any, there may be one gopher in there, every now and again. They don't like that disturbance for sure.
Yeah.
So, and this year we've had an explosion in the gopher population. So for example, I've lost almost all my blackberry. I had a pretty good blackberry patch out there, and I just could not keep up with the gophers. So I finally gave up and let them stay in there in the hopes they would stay there and not, move on to the rest of the farm.
How do you, what's your process for when you transition the sheep and the pumpkins out and trade, I guess, pastures and fields with them?
Right. Yeah.
Like, what would be your process of preparing the land to get that right?
Yeah. So what I do when I pull the sheep off of there, then I'll take, like I say, I used to use this. Well, I still do actually. This plow, and then I bought that old 1945 farm maul that I've started to use now because it's an upgrade, even though 1945, not very new. But so I'll go in there once I pull the sheep off, and I'll open up those furrows I was talking about, and it takes a while to get that going. But once we get the furrows open, the compost in, the roll pellets in, and roll the topsoil back over, then we'll hit it with a quick till just to make a good seed bed, and then put in drip line, and that way it's ready to plant. And then whenever it's time to plant, we'll go ahead and plant into that row and let it go. Then once we get to the end of the pumpkin season, like for example here, once we get into like October, and I try to leave the pumpkins on as long as I can. Once I go ahead and pull them out, and we're done harvesting and done with everything, then I'll go ahead. I'll let it sit for a little bit so that the plants kind of naturally senesce or whatever, and so they're not quite as lush. And then I'll release the sheep back into here, and then they're like the best cleanup crew ever, because I'll go in here and within a matter of probably about a month or so, they've gone through and cleaned everything up, and it's nice and clean, and no weeds, and all the vines and stuff are gone. And then I also, any of the unmarketable or pumpkins, that we can't take to market, I feed to the sheep because it's good. It's good for their stomachs and their rhythm. So I'll feed them that for as long as the pumpkins stay good.
Yeah, they're pretty good grazers.
Yeah,
which is nice to have.
Oh, for sure. Yes.
Yeah. What experiments have you done over the years on the farm, or trying out different things that have either failed, succeeded? What kind of different?
So I think a lot of it, like the wool pellets, was one of the big experiments, and then I think probably my biggest experiment though was trying this closed loop regenerative cycle. I know regenerative, the term gets used a lot, but in this case it is, because what I'm growing in pumpkins and corn is on the same land that the sheep are, and I'm using them all like a symbiotic life cycle to do that. And that was probably my biggest experiment, because when I first started growing pumpkins in Camp Verde, I didn't use horse manure, and I still don't. I use the sheep manure, it's all composted. But for example, down there I grew barley as a cover crop, and then I would plant it. I would make rows of barley. So that was kind of an experiment there. But then getting back to the sheep, that's when I decided this whole regenerative circle. That was my biggest experiment, which and the quality of the plants and the health of the plants and everything, that was probably my most successful experiment, because it and with a healthy plant, then pests, bugs, and things like that, the plant can repel those naturally better. So it helps, because then you're not having to manage the pest as much if you have a concern.
When you do have pest problems, how is that something that you manage?
So it's something that I don't spray, and I've made the decision not to ever spray, because I keep bees. A lot of the reason I keep bees is for pollinators for pumpkins, but I don't want to damage the bees and everything else. So I've decided just to not spray. So I've tried different, and another experiment would be with letting weeds grow in certain parts of the field. So at the ends of the fields, I don't necessarily knock down the weeds to try to create a problem. And I've experimented with it previous years, and it seems like it works. I don't have a scientific study that says it does, but it seems like a lot of the stuff pulls over there, and I don't have as much, infestations, and I think just the overall management that way kind of helps where I don't have to react, at this point, like with grasshoppers and things like that. And when I have had issues, for example, at Camp Verde one year, I lost a pretty good portion of the pumpkin. It was about 2 acres I was growing on, and there was a really high rate of grasshoppers for whatever reason that year, and they were so bad that they would eat the flesh of the pumpkins, not just the leaves. And I lost between that and the javelina down there. I lost probably 50 or 60% of what I was growing. But I didn't, with grasshoppers you can't really spray, I guess. But I didn't have a method that I could really manage it when it got to this point. So once I got, started growing up here again, then, and I think that the strength of the plants is what helps a lot now. I also keep chickens, and I let them in here before we really start growing, so I think they also help keep some of the pest populations down. That's a lot. We get some of the eggs from them. I don't keep a lot of chickens, but I keep enough that they'll go through here, and you can see them scratching through the rows, and I think they're, throughout the year, kind of helping manage, the eggs or the larvae or whatever may be taking place. So I think a combination of all that has been working for me for quite a few years.
Yeah. Hey, if it works, it works.
That's right.
That's all that matters.
As I said, I don't have to understand it. I just have to be able to duplicate it.
Yeah. You mentioned that you have bees. What sparked your interest in having bees? Do you have them for, you said pollination, but do you also collect honey from them and do that as production based?
Yes, I do a little bit. I'm a terrible beekeeper, so I don't harvest a lot of honey. I mainly keep them for pollinators because around, 2015 or something, I was noticing a low pollination rate on, especially pumpkins and squash. And I noticed I wasn't seeing any bees. And so then, and I've always been interested in bees, so then I went ahead and I had a friend that did a lot of beekeeping, and so he kind of helped me get started. And so I've been keeping them ever since as pollinators. And ever since I've kept them, I've never had issues with pollination. So it's worked out well. And then, occasionally I get a bonus of honey.
Yeah. It's a nice little sweet treat.
Right, exactly, yes.
At the end of the day, you get a sweet treat.
That's right.
What kind of lambs do you have here on the farm?
So these are Navajo churro. So they've been raised in here for a little over 400 years, and of course this is a breed that was really the Navajos people were the ones that really kept this breed alive and got it to what it is today, and so it's a real hardy heritage breed, and they're a little more resistant to diseases and things that many other sheep are, and they can subsist on less feed and less water, and so they're I guess you could call them like a climate smart almost, sheep, because they don't take the care and the inputs that a lot of traditional market sheep do, and they can handle extreme temperatures, so they can handle extreme cold, and they can handle extreme heat, and it's a hard to function breed of sheep. Plus, they lamb very well, and the ewes latch onto their lambs. In the first year, ewe will latch onto the lambs with generally no problem, and they're like the ultimate mothers in protecting them and things like that. So for this Colorado Plateau region, there's probably not many other species of animals that are domesticated that that are as well adapted as the Navajo churro sheep. They grow slower than than a traditional market lamb or market sheep, but they have a less lanolin content, and their meat is not as strong as most traditional lamb, and it's a little sweeter, and so it's used I think in more of a gourmet type, dishes and stuff like that. And we eat a lot of it, and again, I grew up on cattle, so sheep are like, oh no, if you have cattle, you don't do sheep, but to me, the meat, especially like in the ground lamb and things like that, I'll take it, or at least my churro lamb ground meat I'll take any day over beef. It's really good. So, and they've been very, very productive, and they're they're just a fun breed to have have because they have pretty unique personalities, and and then they have when their wool is long, it's the dual staple wool, so it's very very big. They look like big cotton balls out there. They're I think a really good breed of sheep to keep in northern Arizona.
The little cotton ball, kind of like Shaun the Sheep. I don't know if you ever watched Shaun the Sheep.
No,
but he's like little cotton ball sheep.
Yeah. These ones they're like my rams. They look huge and intimidating when they have their full wool because they just look massive. And then you shear them, and they look like little deer. And that's what they say about the Navajo Churro sheep is that they're more like a deer than a sheep. And they are because they have longer legs and they're I think more athletic and everything else.
Yeah. So do you kind of use your sheep for meat as well as the wool, or like kind of how? Yeah. Do you sell the meat at farmers markets as well?
I haven't in a while. I sell the meat, but it's more on a commercial, so I have a buyer that buys it and then sells it retail. Yeah. So. That's mainly been the all the selling so far.
Okay.
So if I'm and so that's the part of my business that I'm trying to scale up more, and that and so then once I have more to sell, then probably sell more at, like the markets here.
Yeah. Hey, if it's working for you now,
right?
We can only go up from here.
That's right. Yeah.
So.
But there has been the demand for lamb is decreased in the last year for some reason, and and I've heard that even from my shear and stuff like that. So I don't know, and obviously it's it's higher priced because it is grown locally and things like that. But the demand is kind of slowed a little bit, but hopefully it'll pick back up. Right.
I grew up eating beef, so lamb wasn't something I ever had.
Right.
It was completely kind of foreign.
Right. Yeah.
But man, we got to figure out how to promote it.
Right.
Get those sales up.
Exactly. Yeah. And because it is, it is really, it's a really high quality too. It's pretty lean, and for people that don't like the taste of it, you can cut a lot of the fats off of it and cook it, and it's not as strong and things like that. But I think a lot of it is because in the early days, people ate lots of sheep and lamb. Because when it comes down pound for pound, I think it's much more efficient to raise than cattle are. But in those early days, they kind of shifted from lamb and sheep to cattle primarily, and then cattle became the big thing. Like in Australia, lamb, I think maybe it's different now, but lamb used to always be the bigger desired item than beef. So it's kind of a lot of that. So I feel like I'm trying to bring back the old school.
Keep working. We'll get there someday.
Yeah, that's right.
We'll bring them back. We'll make it popular. So how do you keep your flock healthy and happy? What are things that you've implemented to make sure that they stay happy little sheep?
Yeah, so I think kind of the big things is clean water, high quality feed and grazing, and then a lot of it is just low stress management, and that's something that I learned from my grandparents on the ranch. There was probably nothing worse you could do than get the cattle wound up and being just loud and noisy. Everything you had to work just as calm as possible, and I think that helps. That keeping that stress level from spiking in the animal kind of overall helps them be able to naturally be healthier and happier. And so and I try to do minimal. I don't try to vaccinate them just to vaccinate them, or like for example, one of the things I do, if I pick a lamb and I know I'm keeping the lamb, I will dock the tail, when they're very young. But if I know that the lamb I'm not going to keep and it's going to be to market for processing, I won't dock the tail because there's no reason. It increases stress, and there's a chance of infection. Although it's a low chance, but there's still that chance of infection. And there's no reason when, in 6 to 8 months, it's just going to go on and get processed.
Yeah.
I do believe in docking the tails because it is more hygienic for the sheep and less chances for problems to develop, especially like if they're out grazing, So it's one of those things, and I try to weigh the risks and benefits for each decision. I have a local farm vet, which there hasn't been one for a long time in this area, and finally there is one now, and she's just awesome, and she's able to like work with me and come up with a management plan to make sure that we can do what's required to keep them safe and healthy, but not go overboard and overmanage. I think that can happen sometimes. And then the other thing too is just growing up. My grandparents were of that generation that you took care of the livestock first before you took care of yourself. And like you fed them before you fed yourself, because especially in those days, they depended on the animals and the animals depended on them. And I think it creates that, just like that respect, if you can call it that. That I think it helps the overall management.
Absolutely.
And it's not something I think again that can be scientifically proven. But I can see with the way they work with cattle and everything else, that everything it seemed to always work better.
Oh yeah, I worked at a meat lab when I was in college, and like you can definitely tell the differences in the effects that stress had on carcasses compared to like low stress animals. Like it would make the meat a little bit tougher.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting to learn about that.
Yes, that is, because that's scientific proof of what basically we've believed for, gosh, I can't even count how many years now. Going back to them over 100, I guess. So, and that because that's the way they all grew up.
Yeah.
You don't see it a lot now. You see a lot of running, and pulling, and jumping, and everything. And I think you could tell you could tell the difference. Nature. So it's good to get the confirmation that works out, and it actually does relate to better tasting, higher quality meat.
Oh yeah.
In the end.
Absolutely, it's definitely interesting to hear how like different effects can have.
Right.
Things. So that was one thing I really liked learning.
Right. That is. That's great to hear, and I'm gonna have to add that to my speed.
There you go. Happy I can assist.
Right.
How has the market access been for you?
So I have to say, up here, the farmers markets have been, completely awesome in working with growers. So there's Flagstaff Community Market, and then Flagstaff Mountain Town Market. And both of those, as a grower, they do everything they can to help you get your stuff to their markets, and they provide a venue that drives traffic that otherwise, you'd have to figure out how to drive on yourself. So that part of it has been, irreplaceable. I wouldn't be able to do what I am now without those two markets. The only thing is that it's limited to 4 hours or 5 hours on a Saturday or a Sunday, so you're trying to fit all your sales, and then maybe try to get a little bit of people that'll come back. But in a case like myself, I don't have a farm stand. I don't have an easy way to sell it throughout the week, because of location and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's been one of my challenges all along, is being able to find a way to continuously make sales, other than just having to fit it all into a couple of days a week, or 1 day a week, for 4 hours.
Yeah.
So that's where I hope there would be more of like an aggregator or something in this area that could purchase, from smaller producers. It would be able to give them a steady supply of actual local, because when I say local, I'm thinking, within Flagstaff or maybe Murray Valley. I'm kind of like a purist when I say local. The local is good, but if you're buying it here, it had to come from here. So that's where, and I think I've heard there are some projects going on for some sort of an aggregator type of a program to happen. But that would help, because that's one of the biggest challenges on marketing stuff. Because then you either have to figure out a way to deliver to people, which is like a logistic nightmare. Have a farm stand, and if you're not in the right location, it's kind of tough. So that's definitely one.
And I know it's been like a pretty big challenge for like some of our Phoenix farmers as well.
Right.
I know it's trying to figure out like how to market it, how to, if I can't go to this farmer's market, how am I going to sell my products? And trying to figure out a way where we can, not per se combine everything together, but have that.
Yes. And I kind of, like early on, I kind of compared it to like in the Midwest, which is a different scenario. In the Midwest, you have like grain and corn buyers, and so anytime you have a harvest and it's ready, if you like the price, you can take that harvest, to that elevator or whatever, and sell it. And so I mean, obviously we're not at that scale, but it's something that I thought, I mean, how much more would I grow if I knew I had a place that I could take. And that's kind of a lot of it's like sometimes it's hard enough to grow up here and get and get it to the point that you can actually harvest it and take it somewhere. So I would probably try to grow more if I knew that there was a more consistent sales avenue.
Yeah. Would you say that's been kind of limiting you from expanding?
I think so. Yeah, because I think, like, for example, I would probably try to double my pumpkins, which I'm at right now. Which again, it's tough to do because I think one of the misnomers about farming is that you need a lot of land, and what I tell a lot of people is that like a lot of land sometimes is worse because you have to be able to manage that much more land, and each square feet you go up is that much more management. You have to be able to either have tractors or a system in place that you can handle. So with me like that, I think I could scale up a little bit, but then you do get to the point where, especially up here with our growing season, we basically have from Memorial Day to Labor Day, and sometimes less than that because of early and late frost, and then all of the weather events and things that we have up here. So it's a very difficult environment to grow, So, but if you knew that there was a less work you had to do to market and sell the thing when you were done, it would definitely be an incentive to do that.
How have you managed like frost and like when the freezes come for your plants?
So sometimes there's not a lot you can do because, like, a couple of years ago we had on June 26th it froze. It was like 24 degrees or something like that. So it wasn't like a frost; it was a hard freeze. Yeah. We had just sprouted pumpkins, and we did extra heavy covering and used wool and all kinds of stuff to save the field. But that's usually what I use is like I'll put up row covers if I know it's going to be coming early or late. Mainly I'll do some sort of covering, and then it's funny with any growing environment. There's like macro environments. So like I have areas here that will freeze every time, and the same night I have other areas that don't freeze at all. And so I try to put things in places where it's not as likely to freeze. If they're more sensitive, like obviously with you're kind of limited.
Yeah.
And covering, like for example, now if there was to be a frost, I have covers, but it would be pretty difficult to save it because it's the scale on that now. And I mean, it's not like I have hundreds of acres of pumpkins, but I'm at a scale now that it's not like I have a few raised beds. You can actually cover those, put heat in them and stuff like that. And save them. So and sometimes you're just at the mercy of the elements. And I've had that too, where I've had early frosts, and like in early September, and there's nothing worse because they'll wipe out most of the plants, and then it won't freeze again until the end of October or beginning of November. So you just lost all that growing. And so the joys of farming, especially at 7,000 feet.
Oh yeah, with like an early freeze or frost comes, do you typically take the chance and kind of plant again, or you just kind of have to cut your losses?
I just cut the losses. So if I know there's going to be a really bad freeze, then we'll go out and we'll harvest everything we can, and then we put it in trailers with covers. And then if it's going to be that bad, I can put at least like space heaters to move the air, and that'll save at least that harvest. But yeah, it's too late. If something happens early enough, so if I freeze early enough in the season, then I do replant. I've had to do that. Or, for example, this year I had problems with squirrels and those caterpillars eating the seedlings right when they pop out of the ground. And we replanted some of these areas 3 times. And I still lost some. I probably lost over 400 or 500 plants this year. I've never had that issue before. And And so my rows aren't 100% full this year because we kept fighting and kept replanting. And then you can replanting because you're not going to fit now.
Those things are
Yeah, there's never a shortage of paddles out here.
No, there's not. Like my dad's been telling me about all the squirrels.
Right.
So,
And then if they don't get the plants, then they get the pumpkins later on.
yeah.
So then you have damaged pumpkins that you can't sell because they're all cheap.
Yeah.
So and I guess the other thing too is I choose varieties. I've grown the same varieties. I try new ones all the time. I have the core like 4 or 5 varieties I've grown, and I've chosen them because I know they grow well up here, and because they're speed to harvest. So I know that they usually will fit into that window as long as there's not something crazy.
Okay. So what kind of pumpkin varieties do you pick? Your 4 main ones that you grow?
So I grow Champion, Racer, Casperitas, and Weeby Littles are kind of the core ones that I grow the most of. And then every year I'll try a couple of new ones, but those are the ones that I'll always grow. So then the other 2 I grow beyond that, but not as much, are the porcelain dolls. So they're like a real big, they're pink. A lot of them, they call them Cinderella pumpkins. And because they have really good, tasty flesh, they can be used for pies and things like that. And they store well, so they'll store for a long time. Or most pumpkins store well. The Rouge with the flat red ones. They also have really good flesh for pies and things like that, and they look pretty good. Those are kind of the main ones. But I don't grow any pie pumpkins. So I'd rather save my rows for a specialty pumpkin.
Yeah.
Because I've grown pie pumpkins in the past, and it's just one of those things that every other grower grows pie pumpkins, for that demand in the fall. And so I've decided I'll let them grow the pie pumpkins and I'll let others.
What it kind of makes you, I'm sure everyone loves seeing all the fun.
Right, exactly. Yes.
So would you say fall is your favorite season?
Yes, yes it is. Pumpkin season, when I get to the market especially, is my favorite season.
I bet. I love pumpkins, so fall is my favorite season as well.
Yeah, and that's the thing, I guess one of the reasons I like growing them is because, I've always grown them. They've always been a staple crop, I think, even for hundreds of years up here. But, and then the thing about it is, it just makes people happy. So I bring pumpkins to the market, and I have lots of varieties and colors. And you can just watch people walk in, and you can see their eyes just light up and smile every time, and it's crazy year after year. It never changes, they're always like that. And then, of course, all the kids see them and they come running to them and stuff like that, and we try to pick them up and all that. So it's, it makes it a lot of fun, too.
Is that one of your favorite things about being
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think it's the accomplishment of getting the harvest. Especially up here, I've told a lot of people, some areas, I think it's hard to grow anywhere. It's tough to get a harvest. But up here, if you get through, especially with pumpkins, because they are really difficult to grow up here. But when you get to the end of the season and you have a lot of different colors and they look nice and they're, their quality, and you see people see the value in them, that right there is kind of a lot of attainment in itself.
nice and rewarding?
Right. Yeah. It is. Yeah, because you can say, you did that, and it's not something that can be done easily, especially at this scale.
Oh yeah, it's a lot of hard work.
Yes.
And we know that it's tough work. How do you assess whether a crop or practice is worth the effort?
So that's where, when it comes to the business side of things, that's always been kind of my downfall. But I do try to look at how much I think I can grow, and then what my percentage of success might be, and then what I could, how easy it would be to get to a market, and what I think I can get. That's kind of how I assess to grow new things. And so a lot of times I'll try new things, like I've tried the blackberries and and different things. That's probably the latest thing I've tried. Mostly I switch between what I've grown before. But that's kind of the approach I take. But then a lot of times the rest of my approach is just to try it, not to try to over-research it or overthink it. Just try it, because a lot of times, everything seems like it's going to work perfect, and then you grow it, and then you see all the, the things that don't make it where it's not. what you thought. So a lot of it for me is just, just growing it and seeing what it does. So that's kind of probably my heavier weight is just
Hey, sometimes you got to take that chance.
right, exactly. Another venture, another game.
Exactly. What made you want to start growing pumpkins?
It's just something I've kind of always just grown, and I've always enjoyed growing them. Even when I just did it, like for us around here, it was always fun, like with my kids, because when they had their own pumpkins that they could carve, they were actually from here. And a lot of it is, like I say, just going to the market and seeing people's reaction to it. And it's just a fun time of year to drive up with a pickup truck full of, I have an old truck that my grandfather gave me that he's the one that actually showed me the growing and stuff like that. So to be able to put what I'm growing now into his old truck and then take it to the market, it just makes it a fun experience. So, when it comes down to it, like I say, a lot of it is the reward of doing that. It's nice that I'm at a point now that I think that my pumpkin growing, it covers itself, and I mean, it's, I'm not going to be able to retire on it, but it's something that it covers itself, and it's helping me to continue to expand. So, I guess that's why.
Yeah, it's a start.
Yep,
and
right.
then hopefully room for expansion.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
How has adopting these practices affected any profit margins?
I think it's definitely improved. So when I first started trying to grow to sell, which was in Camp Verde, I spent a lot more money and to do what I'm doing now, and a lot of it's kind of like that relearning curve. We're trying to grow at a different rate, but I was using like more. I never used. The fertilizers I would use would be the organic, like the Dr. Earth and all those kinds. And so I was spending money on those kind of inputs and just spending a lot more money in general. And now by adopting this more regenerative practices, I've been able to reduce that part of the cost and probably the associated cost with over fertilizing, under fertilizing, and everything else. So these practices, and even as much as as more expensive as the wool pellets can be, since I am doing it in bulk, I'm able to use it for several years when I make, not several years, for at least a couple years when I have these batches done. So it's lowered my overall expenses, and that's why the pumpkins and stuff can stand on their own now. Between that and even the decorative corn that I bring, because it was that big of a difference from going from like a traditional style growing to genetics.
What have been your biggest failures or surprises?
So again, probably like I say, the biggest failure is the not being able to manage, the gophers, for example, but probably that part of it. And then also, I think, and I don't think it's a failure, but I guess one of the things is not being able to scale bigger faster. I guess because I've slowly been building it, and I've been doing it on my own. I haven't had any external investment to this point, grants or anything like that. I've done it all on my own. So but then you get to a point where you feel like, well, I should be selling like X amount more, by now. So that, I guess, but I haven't given up yet, so it's not a failure. So, but that's kind of, I think, the biggest thing is that I just feel like sometimes I haven't had the vision, maybe on the business side or the planning side or whatever, to be able to get it bigger than what I have right now. It's still a challenge because, like, my boys, they both have careers now. My daughter, she's in college, so she's been helping me with it. But now I'm to the point where I'm having to do a lot on my own, or have volunteers or stuff like that. So you're always kind of limited by what's going on. But again, it's that vision of how to expand.
Try to figure it out, map it.
Yeah, right, exactly. So that's why I've been doing a lot more programs like what you guys have put on, and some of the other organizations that kind of go into those types of discussions and things like that.
Yeah. Well, we love promoting our local farmers and trying to help them out in any way that we can. To help them expand so that they can meet their goals.
Right. Yeah. And your organization is great because it helps get the word out. That again, for me, everything you do takes extra time. So like trying to market there, then that's taken away from doing something else. But you have to do it. But I'm an effective marketer, so any help I can get is
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
absolutely. Well, we're happy to help promote you.
Yeah, no, this is great.
Yeah, I know. You said in the past that you've done some cover cropping.
Right.
Do you still do cover cropping on your operation?
So I haven't in a while. I did the barley for cover cropping, and then so right now where I'm growing the pumpkins, I don't, because I don't have enough time to grow and then rotate. But what I do instead is I think what people call the bale method or litter method. So when I bring my sheep in here, and once they've cleaned everything up, then I'll begin to feed them, and I feed them in quadrants.
Okay.
And so because the sheep will waste so much hay, they'll actually leave it on the ground, and so and then I'll just work through the entire area until I have a pretty good coverage of the different types of hay, and in effect it creates somewhat of an effect of a cover crop, because it's holding in the carbon, it's holding in the moisture, it's stopping the topsoil from being blown or eroded away, and then it's eventually going to break down into organic matter, which is going to improve the soil. And so again, up here it's so difficult to grow because we have such a short growing season to begin with, even though there's some native grasses that may go through the winter dormant. It's by doing this this litter method, it makes it, and I've seen the results of it, in being able to go back into, like I was telling you, the field, and having all the worms, be there, because the worms leave if there's not water, there's not moisture, there's not, feed. And they're, as soon as I open up a furrow, they're just loaded in there.
Yeah.
So I'm confident that this method does work. And I know there's concern, like with herbicides that have been applied to like the hay, being translating into the soil, and I've never observed any instance of that. Now I don't know. Like I say, I do what I feed is high quality, so I don't think it's typically sprayed as much as some, but it definitely seems to work, and it repeatedly works, for years. So that's what I do right now in lieu of cover crops. Now I am going to start planting more because I have another grain drill that I picked up that I'm going to start using to try to put in areas that I'm not going to graze for a while. I'm going to try to put in some, like I don't know, like winter wheats or something, stuff like that. And do some experiments with those.
Well, we're excited to hear about how the experiments go.
Yes.
You'll have to let us know. Is there anything that you've decided to stop growing, practicing, or doing?
So I, definitely for now, the application of any of the even organic type fertilizers, I decided to stay with just the wool pellets, and occasionally with like hydrolyzed fish, seaweed emulsion. Last year I didn't use any of that at all. I wanted to test the wool pellets exclusively, and they were not great. I do like the hydrolyzed fish and seaweed emulsion. Once is a foliar spray, because I think it helps the plant tissue, and it gives them a little bit of a kind of like a treat, like a first, but not using it, completely. But definitely stopping the any of those more granular commercial type fertilizers, and that's kind of the biggest thing. Like even the blackberries, failed, the whole thing's gone. I'm still. It was something that I would try again if I could figure out a way to be pretty sure that I can manage to go from so I either don't learn my lessons very well, or
it hasn't deterred you to it.
Right.
So hasn't stopped you.
Right.
What on the farm takes up most of your time?
So definitely just the general management of weeding and making sure that everything's getting water, and just making sure that varmints aren't getting into everything, and just kind of that overall management, and then the harvesting probably takes up a lot of time, but just the overall management I think is what takes the most. that's the other thing too. I think is when I grew in Camp Verde, I was having to drive back and forth, and so I wasn't at the field every day. And that's one thing I did learn there is that things get away one day, it's a difference between something getting. So being in the field every day, checking everywhere multiple times a day, helped a lot. So that's why takes. But I think it might be one of the most benefits you get out of it too, because again, it's like catching, like if I see a plant that's wilted like the one this morning, then I know that I need to put my traps in a different spot to keep up with the gophers and not lose even more plants.
Absolutely. How much time do your sheep take?
So so I kind of split between the two, when I'm out here, like multiple times a day, checking on them and make sure everything's going. And then if I'm not grazing them completely, then feeding them and cleaning their water, because we try to rinse and wash I use small troughs so that we don't build up a lot of algae and things like that. So we're trying to rinse and wash their troughs, usually every other day, especially during the summer when it's really hot like this. So again, it's a lot of time, but I think it's the benefit of being able to catch on things. And then we'll have, and the same thing with growing, you'll have times where you get like kind of a burst of required activity, like for plowing or for planting, and then, or like with the sheep for shearing, or, once lambing is, during lambing season, you can be out all night, working with lambs and things like that. Or, after they've lambed, we kind of go through, we try to get all of our lambs into a group, and then, I'll bring the vet over and we'll check them all out and we'll give them, we'll do just the one vaccination we do, which is the CDT. We'll do all that, and we either need the tails off and band any of the lambs that need to be feathers. And so they're kind of like bursts of activities that take place, that require more time, but they're not like every day you're not able to do that.
Absolutely. Feeding always took me a long time.
Right.
But I hung out with them and I love on them.
Yeah.
So that was always what took most of my time.
Right.
How do you assess whether making a change to a new practice or crop is worth it?
Again, I try to research a little bit and I try to quantify it somehow besides just like, I think that worked, and so I try to find ways to do that. It's probably one of another kind of where I'm not the best at, because I a lot of times I will kind of like I say, I think that change helped or it didn't help, But the other thing is, if I feel like it made a difference, then I'll try to incorporate it the next year and try to confirm, that it did help at least, by saying, okay, this year it worked, but then next year it doesn't, then I kind of know maybe it didn't make as good of a difference. So, but it's a lot of times, it's a lot of waiting, because especially growing, because then I'll be done, and then it's a whole other year before you're back, and a lot of things go on, and you kind of lose that. So I've been trying to kind of keep notes or journals on my phone of what did, or a lot of times I'll take pictures so that I can actually see the difference between year to year, and then I don't have to rely on it.
Yeah, I know. Note taken. It's a good one.
And they say to always keep good records and things, and I keep the records where I need to keep the records, but it's an area that for me is easy to not pay as much attention to. So that is the one nice thing with technology, being able to even just a picture, I can tell a lot of things of what I'm looking for next year. And so when I'm growing, matter of fact, or when I'm deciding what to plant this upcoming year, I'll look at like what I sold and things like that, but then I'll go back in my pictures and look at how much difficulty or how well a plant thrived, and then know whether I'm going to spend the time to plant it or try something else or use something else.
How have you managed your record keeping?
So I've been trying to use apps to do that.
Okay.
So I use like the Note app for a lot of things, and then for my livestock, I use a livestock app because it's nice because I can keep track of any like medical treatments, and I can keep track of lineage from all the ewes and things like that. So that part's been invaluable, and I've been trying to do that because with paper, it seems like especially with me, I end up with, copies and then I can't find it. So by having it on, on notes or on spreadsheets, then I'm able to at least have one central place to go.
Yeah. Command epic.
Right. That's right.
Find what you're looking for.
That's right.
Makes it easy. Well, Art, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with me. Is there any other things that you'd like to say about your operation today?
No, thank you for having me. This has been fun, and it's been good to have these questions to think through a lot of the stuff that day to day I probably don't think of. So it was very helpful, and I appreciate you doing this, and I appreciate your program because it helps get a lot of this information out here. I think there's a lot of people that like starting or whatever that maybe can learn from some of the mistakes that we've made ahead of time. But no, like I say, just I go to the markets here in Flagstaff is where I sell the extra little pellets I have. I take and sell those, and then any of the additional lamb we'll have in those markets as well. And so, basically, I use my Instagram to promote everything or to notify of wherever I'm going, and things like that. So,
and we'll be sure to link your Instagram and all your social medias too in the video, so everyone can go follow Art. Do you have any advice for any beginning and new farmers?
I think the biggest advice I would have is to research it and find something that's already been grown in your area that has a pretty good track record, but just try it, just do it, because you can research it all day, and I talked to a lot of people at the farmers market that they're so worried about doing it wrong that they never do it, and so then they never see if it was wrong or not. And so I think that's my biggest advice and even if you start small and grow bed, pick something that's, if you've never grown before, pick something that's like squash is something that's a pretty good success rate, or tomatoes can be difficult or whatever, but anyways, pick something that's good for your area during that time, and then just try it and see how it does, and then keep track of if it fails or not. And I think the other big thing that was kind of hard for me to learn was, even if it doesn't work the first time or the second time, keep trying it, because every year is new challenges, and sometimes things will grow great, like this year, and then there's some years where like the one in Camp Verde, where I couldn't do anything right, and I barely had any harvest at all. And if you stack all of your results on that one year, you've missed out on all the rest.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, the two big things is to try it and keep trying it.
Very good advice. Well, thank you again, Art, and thank you all for tuning in. We hope that you like this video podcast style, and we hope that you keep tuning in. So big thanks to Art, and we'll be sure to link all his social medias.
Thank you.
Yeah.